In France's most secretive lodge, two soldiers stood outside a woman's home, weapons in hand, waiting for the signal. The order had been given. The mission was clear. But there was one thing they didn't know. The hands behind that order weren't the states. They were gloved hands wearing rings. In the narrow streets of Pau, on the outskirts of Paris, there was a door. It looked ordinary. The entrance to an old stone building. People walked past without a second glance. Why would they? To them it was just another historic structure. Maybe an old club, maybe an abandoned office. But on certain nights of the month, those who stepped through that door entered an entirely different world. Jean-Luc Béore was in his early 30s when he first approached that door. He was well educated, respected in his circles. He buried his hands in his jacket pockets, looked both ways down the street. Nobody there. He stepped inside. That night, the Ethanor Masonic Lodge welcomed him, and his life would never be the same again. But the truly shocking thing Béore had no idea, as he crossed that threshold, that 20 years later his name would be read aloud in a French courtroom. Murder, attempted assassination, organized crime, and soldiers from France's elite Foreign Legion, all of them linked by one thing, that lodge, that door, and Jean-Luc Béore. In February 2025, 22 files passed through the doors of the French prosecutor's office. Each file had a name on it, a life, a charge, 4 members of the Foreign Legion, 2 police officers, a retired domestic intelligence officer, a security guard, 2 business executives, and among them, people ranging in age from 30 to 73, with not a single prior criminal record between them. Their common thread wasn't a gang oath or a mafia agreement. They had all shared the same lodge, Ethanor. When the prosecutor laid the files on the table, the lawyers in the room exchanged glances. Because the list didn't end. The murder of a racing driver, the attempted murder of a business coach, an assault on a trade unionist, aggravated violence, criminal conspiracy, all traced back to a 20-person lodge in a suburb of Paris. Wait, don't skip past this detail. 20 people, a handful of individuals in a small town. And this wasn't some local news story buried in a regional paper. This case would dominate French media for weeks. Because the question was simple, but the answer was horrifying. Who were these people working for? From the outside, Jean-Luc Béore was an unremarkable man. 50s, hair neatly combed. His gaze sharpened when he spoke, self-assured in meetings. He carried every hallmark of the French middle class, a good car, a good neighborhood, a good image. But every time he walked through the lodge door, he became someone else. Inside Masonic lodges, the lines of identity blur. Your professional status outside means little in here. What matters is which level you've reached, which rituals you've been admitted to, which network you've joined. Béore rose through the ranks, step by step, quietly, and as he rose, he drew people around him, carefully chosen people, soldiers, officials, contacts from the intelligence world. As this network grew, so did Béore's power inside the lodge. That's the moment everything changed. One day, the lodge was no longer just rituals and symbols. There were assignments, orders, and people were being selected to carry out those orders. No questions asked. But those people suppressed the voice inside them as they obeyed. Because they had been told, this is state business. This is for France. You haven't seen the biggest shock yet. Because when the soldiers in the hit squad described that night, what shook them most wasn't the order itself. It was where the order came from. We don't know his full name. French courts still seal certain details, but we know this. He was a racing driver. Speed, adrenaline, the roar of an engine, that was his world. His social circle was small. He had no connection to politics. He had no reason to think he needed protection, but someone had made a decision about him. The evidence prosecutors laid out showed this. The driver's connection to a certain individual had made him dangerous. Perhaps it was testimony. Perhaps it was knowledge. Perhaps he had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Who gave the order? Was it Béore, the lodge, or did it come from somewhere higher? The court is asking that question, and every answer points to a darker place. When the driver died, nobody understood. An accident? A tragedy? It remained a question mark for years, until 2020, when 2 soldiers were caught outside a home, armed. November 2020, 2 names flashed on French intelligence radar, both from the Foreign Legion, both trained, disciplined, loyal to their assignments, and both arrested that night near the home of a business coach, weapons on them. Her name, Marie-Helene Diney. She was a business coach. She advised companies. A middle-aged, quiet woman. There were no weapons in her life. No threats. No fear. Until that night, when the soldiers were taken into custody, the interrogation began. French prosecutors sat across the table, and the soldiers talked. We were told this woman was working for Mossad. That sentence cuts through the air of any room. Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence agency. Béore and the lodge had convinced the soldiers that Marie-Helene Diney was a spy working for Israel. So the assignment was legitimate. So they were acting on behalf of the state. But the real question was, did this order actually come from the state? And that's where the investigation deepened. Because one possibility was this: the soldiers really had received orders from some arm of the French government. The other possibility was equally real. The lodge had manufactured the appearance of state authority to carry out its own dirty work. Both possibilities were equally terrifying, but the most shocking thing? The Mossad claim was just the beginning, because as the investigation deepened, what emerged wasn't a picture of one lodge. It pointed to a system that had been operating in silence for decades. Let's turn back the pages of history a moment. 1990. Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti stepped to the podium and made a confession. Since World War II, a covert structure had been operating inside Italy, built with NATO coordination, but never named in any official document. Its name, Gladio. Who was inside this network? Soldiers, intelligence operatives, and members of certain lodges whose participation was effectively mandatory, particularly P2, Italy's most powerful Masonic lodge. The P2 Lodge had been involved in assassinations, bombings, political manipulation. Its membership included bankers, judges, journalists, and government officials. The lodge was so powerful it was alleged to have infiltrated the Vatican itself. And now in France, in 2025, a 22-person trial had opened. Prosecutors didn't name Gladio directly in their indictment, but the structure of the case, the mechanics of the system, the way soldiers were used, all of it echoed the same model. You might not believe this, but this is not conspiracy theory. We're talking about a real case, on record, being argued in a real courtroom. The question remains, was the Ethanor Lodge in France alone? Or was it simply the visible part of something much larger? That was the central question before the French court. Were the soldiers acting on behalf of the state? Or did a lodge exploit them by making them believe they were acting for the state? This question changes everything. If the first possibility is true, the French government ordered assassination operations against civilian targets on its own soil. That is both a legal and political earthquake. If the second possibility is true, a Masonic lodge used the image of state authority to issue death orders for its own interests. An equally terrifying picture. The prosecution's theory leans this way. The lodge acted like the state to use soldiers as instruments. But what was feeding the lodge itself? That brings us back to Béore's network, the relationships he had painstakingly built over years. Retired intelligence officers, active police, each brought information from their own institution, and that information converged at a single point inside the lodge. Béore, he was both the information center and the decision point. To the outside world, a routine Mason. Inside, the nervous system of the entire operation. Wait, don't miss this detail. At the top of this structure alongside Béore there was only one other name, Frederick Valio, and when investigators examined Valio's history, the documents they found surprised even the prosecutors. You won't have heard the name Frederick Valio. Nobody outside France has. But in the narrow streets of Po his name was whispered. Valio was Béore's right hand inside the lodge. As in every organization, there were two kinds of leaders here, the one who builds the vision and the one who executes it. Béore was the first. Valio was the second. When Valio's file was reviewed by the prosecution, this was the picture that emerged. Decades in the service of certain interests, a point at which private sector and state became inseparable, a man who used the lodge as both a collaboration platform and an operational tool. But the most striking thing in the case file was this: the network run by Valio and Béore wasn't limited to France. Connections extended to other countries, other networks. This was a local murder trial on its surface, but the underlying structure may not have been local at all. How far will the court pursue these connections? We don't yet know. The trial is expected to last 3 months, and with every new hearing, new documents will come to light. Marie-Hélène Digny most likely relives that night every night. What did she feel when she heard the sound outside her door? Curiosity at first, probably, then unease. Then, when she opened the door, or when the police called, she learned the truth. Someone had tried to kill her. 2 armed soldiers, on the grounds that she worked for Mossad, a business coach. Mossad. That sentence is absurd on its face, but what was more absurd was this. This woman had been surveilled for months before she knew anything was happening. Her movements had been tracked. The layout of her home had been mapped. And in the dark of a particular night, an operation had been set in motion on a single command. When the soldiers were caught, the operation collapsed. Digny was alive. But years passed since that night. And in Arly-Arwoux, Digny's name was read again in a French courtroom. Not as a victim this time, but as the witness who started it all. What would you do? Would you have the courage to face a system that had tried to erase your life? That's the moment everything changed. Because Digny's testimony didn't just lead prosecutors to Béore, it led them to a question nobody had ever asked. How many other victims had passed through this lodge? Let's pause here for a moment. Not every Mason in France, or anywhere in the world, is connected to this case. The vast majority of Masons are people practicing historical rituals, engaged in charitable work, part of a social network. But in certain periods of history, in certain lodges, things were different. There's a passage in Albert Pike's book, Morals and Dogma. Pike was one of the most prominent Masonic figures of the 19th century, and in that book he states plainly, members at lower levels are not told what Freemasonry really is. You can't see the inner structure until you've risen to the upper levels. This means lodges are inherently hierarchical and layered by design. In this French case, the same was true. The majority of the lodge's 20 members probably didn't know where the orders came from. Only the level immediately above them knew. Only Béore and Valio could see the whole picture. This is precisely what makes the system both powerful and dangerous. It leaves no fingerprints. The chain breaks, but the system continues. Remember the William Morgan case? 1826. America. A man attempting to write a book about Freemasonry. He vanished. And that incident led directly to the formation of the anti-Masonic Party in the United States because people had come to understand these lodges weren't just about ritual. Historians and researchers have debated this question for decades. There is documented evidence that the British Empire used Masonic lodges as an intelligence network. During the colonial era, lodges in different countries functioned as information exchange hubs. Local administrators, merchants, military officers, all gathered under the same roof and talked. There are claims that the CIA made use of Masonic connections during the Cold War, that the KGB similarly infiltrated analogous networks, Both blocks had used shadow networks as operational tools. In the P2 case, this was proven beyond doubt. And now in France, in 2025, the Ethanor case was asking the same question. Was this a mafia organization? Or was it the visible portion of a larger intelligence structure? The court will search for answers. But some answers never leave closed rooms. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet, because the least discussed aspect of this case is this. The majority of defendants face life sentences. France has no death penalty. But this doesn't mean the lodge's structure will collapse entirely, because a lodge is still standing behind the defendants. The trial began in February 2025. A 3-month process is expected. 22 defendants, hundreds of pages of evidence, dozens of witness testimonies. Béore and Valio face life imprisonment. But the questions to be answered throughout the trial aren't only legal. First, how long was this lodge overlooked? Were the connections running through the state truly invisible, or were they noticed and ignored? Second, how was it possible for soldiers to genuinely believe they were acting on behalf of the state? This shows just how blurred the line between lodges and intelligence structures can become. Third, what is the full list of victims? Only one racing driver? Or were other incidents over the years connected to this lodge? The court will attempt to shed light on these questions, or try to, because some things stay behind closed doors. Just like that door in the streets of Po. When he walked into the courtroom, Béore looked calm. Lawyers at his side, shirt pressed, no fear on his face, no remorse. He scanned the room, saw the journalists, saw the cameras, and stared straight ahead. What was he thinking in that moment? We can't know. Maybe he thought the lodge would protect him. Maybe he thought the network he'd spent years building would somehow activate. Maybe he genuinely believed a state apparatus would move from behind the curtain. Or maybe he wasn't thinking anything at all, just watching, calculating, waiting. The judge took the bench. The hearing is open. And from that moment, 30 years of accounting began. 22 people, 1 lodge, a handful of orders, and the question of what really lay beneath it all. But the most shocking thing of all, one of the most important witnesses in this case refused to speak. And their attorney stated in court, "My client fears for their life, not an accusation, an official legal statement." And the court accepted it. You cannot look at this case in isolation. Italy had P2, it had Gladio, America had William Morgan. And throughout history, every time a major covert structure surfaced, people said the same thing. This doesn't happen. This is a conspiracy theory. Then came the documents, the confessions, the court verdicts, and those who said impossible fell silent. This French case demands that we ask, where does the line between the state and secret networks begin and end? Did that line ever truly exist? Or was it always just a functional ambiguity? We don't have the answer. The court will search for it. But what we do know, there is a door. In the old streets of Po, those who walked through it became part of something, and that something cost people their lives. Think about it for a moment. You're building a career. You want to expand your network. Someone shows you a door. Inside there are very powerful people, connections, opportunities, a network. Do you go in? Béore went in. The soldiers went in. The police officers went in. The retired intelligence officers went in. All through the same door. And now they're all in the same courtroom. This question needs to be asked because this case isn't unique to France. Because covert structures don't exist only in Masonic lodges. They can exist in any network, any hierarchy. The moment you stop asking questions, the moment you stop examining, you've taken one more step toward that door. And when they thought it was over, when the soldiers were caught in 2020, when everyone said case closed, the prosecution released a new list of names. Because this network wasn't limited to 22 people. January 2025, The prosecution completed its final preliminary hearing. New evidence arrived, new connections, new names, some still outside, some still unknown. The trial is expected to last 3 months, but cases like this rarely conclude, because every answer opens a new door. Every witness reveals another corridor. Béore and Valio sit in the defendant's chair, Daniel Balu beside them, Foreign Legion soldiers beside them. And there in that courtroom, a story that began with a small lodge in a small town has transformed into a massive investigation encompassing the French state, its military, its intelligence services, and centuries of Masonic history. What will the outcome be? The court will speak. But some things never leave closed rooms. Everyone had learned the truth, but the biggest shock, the deepest secret of this case, still stands behind that closed door, and it may never open. There is a door. In the streets of Po, an old stone building, no sign on it, no nameplate. People walking past never look up. But behind that door lies 20 years of secrets. A racing driver's life, a business coach's nightmare, a night that put 2 soldiers in a cell. In the moment a man, Jean-Luc Béore, first walked toward that door, everything began in that moment, and everything is now being accounted for in a French courtroom.